Great. So, as I said, this panel is brought to you by the I Am ALS Many Shades of ALS team. And this is a community team that brings attention to and provides resources for the mental, physical, and social health of people of color living with and impacted by ALS. If you'd like to learn more about the Many Shades team, we're always looking for new members. We have a sign up page that I will put into the chat. Like I said, if you're interested, I'm happy to talk with you or put you in touch with the co-chairs. We'd love to get you plugged in if you'd like to learn more. I think this covers everything from the sort of housekeeping side. So let's kind of dive in. This is the third session in our Let's Talk About It panel series. This is the second session of a two-part conversation. So in October, we discussed the impact of religion and spirituality on living with ALS and other terminal diseases. And today we're going to explore different cultural beliefs and that impact on a diagnosis like ALS or another terminal disease. So I will stop talking and turn it over to our esteemed moderator, Troy Fields.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks everybody for taking the time this afternoon to join us. I know it's usually a very hectic time of the year, and so we're delighted that you took a little bit of time here to join us today and dive into the aspects of how culture is affecting our journey with ALS. And we have a great panel assembled for you today. By way of introductions, my name is Troy Fields. I'm here in Tampa, Florida. It's diagnosed. It will be nearly 7 years now. I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and therefore my background in the Zoom picture. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our panel and get introductions started. So why don't we start with you, Becky, and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Lakia Nard. I am out of Kentucky. I'm also the founder of Melanin Children Matter, Inc. My connection to ALS is my son was diagnosed at the age of 3, passed away at the age of 7. And yeah, I think that's it. I think that was all the questions I finished.
Thank you, Lakia. Bernie, you're up.
Okay, my name is Bernadine Ukeke. My connection to ALS is I was diagnosed with ALS in 2019, although I was one of those who had symptoms for 2 years prior to that. But it took forever to get a diagnosis. I travel back and forth between Orlando, Florida, and Lagos, Nigeria, West Africa. My background is depicting the tropics, which is a beach here somewhere in Lagos, Nigeria. And well, I work toward trying to get people to understand the diagnosis is taking too long. So that's my connection to ALS.
Thank you, Bernie. Dr. Gregory, it's an honor for you to be part of our panel today. And why don't you introduce yourself to the rest of the participants?
Yes. My name is Henry Gregory. I'm a clinical psychologist, family therapist, and a retired professor from the University of Maryland School of Nursing. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and my connection to this is I am the uncle of the esteemed Randy Gregory, who is also with us today.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Gregory, for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
While I have you on the spot, I was wondering if perhaps you can get us started with maybe a working definition of the word culture for purposes of our panel today.
Mm-hmm. Culture is the way a group of people attempt to meet their needs. And to do that, what has to be accommodated is the environment, the resources, the weather, um, as well as their internal resources, includes the way people think, and perceptions and beliefs, values, perceptions of how the world runs. All cultures have worldviews, if you will, ways of looking at things that help us to understand what's going on in the world. The challenge is, it's easy to think that one's perception, one's worldview is it. It is a fact, and that it includes everybody all the time in all situations. But as we said, different people in different places have different ways of perceiving things, different values, have been through different things, and it gives them different values and different beliefs like that. So when we do better when we accept people in their cultural frames and not go through an ethnocentric way of understanding that says, my culture is the way to do things and everybody else is wrong. You know, I should say, all of us are multicultural. All of us are multicultural, you know, that might include the makeup of your family, or where you're from, your ethnicity, or your gender, education, many things. All of us are multicultural. What part of what we have happening in the world right now is, how should I say, there's a dominant worldview that has kind of um, influenced, if not controlled, a lot of the narrative about what's happening in the world. And many of us think of it as a linear worldview that talks about rugged individualism, that talks about empiricism, that talks about other issues as the way to see things. And that has its values, but that's not the only way to see things. There's a more ancient way of looking at things that's more relational, that is more about, rather than individualism, it's about collectivism, how everything that we do affects everybody else. And instead of just knowing things empirically, and empirically means I can do it at will and show it to you and get the same results every time. Well, there's another way of looking at things, and it's called subjectivity. And that just says that what I experience, although I may not be able to show it to you, though I may not be able to show it at will, I still have to pay attention to that. I only say that to say that when we could talk more in detail about these different worldviews, but one of the things that I think challenges us in many ways that we're conscious of and unconscious of is this dominant worldview gets put out as the only way to see things, and everything else is substandard or wrong. And how it manifests itself is in this, excuse my language, this capitalistic system that we have that kind of controls everything that is a culture into itself. So what happens is, how should I say, corporate or monetary interests and power get pushed over top of many times human or relational, interpersonal priorities. So you can think of it as simple as what many of us experience with insurance. You say, is insurance really about meeting our needs or meeting the needs of the insurance company? You know, so, But my point is, there are many different cultures. And even as we look at ALS, there's a subculture that is involved in the understanding, the treatment, the support of ALS. And what part of what we're proposing is, as providers, as support, as clients, we all do better when we kind of understand it holistically rather than through a narrow cultural lens. And at some level, it takes some courage, some faith to look beyond one's culture, to look at other ways of seeing and understanding things. So you didn't ask me for a dissertation, so maybe I should stop here.
It was very interesting. So I was at least listening intently to every word. Thank you so much for that. I guess with that, a good segue is to jump right into kind of how we apply those elements that Dr. Gregory just went over, and how do we apply that into our own ALS experiences. And so I'm going to turn to the panel here in a sec, but before I do that, just a reminder that as I ask these questions of the panel, I'm also asking these questions of you participants, and really want to listen to your own answers and your experiences as we go through these. So just keep that in mind. So I would start with our first question, and that is, talked about some of the cultural norms and beliefs. And I'm curious, panelists, how have those experiences, those elements have affected your own personal experience in terms of ALS or terminal diseases, terminal diagnosis in general? How have those traditions, rituals, belief systems, how they have affected your experience? And I'm going to start off with Lakia. Why don't we kick us off with that, if you wouldn't mind?
In all culture, the African American culture, there is they have a stigma or perception, so to speak, that prayer answers all. So it's just a go pray about it. It'll be fine. And then there's also the backlash of, well, he must have did something. I've had comments said my son was the way that he was because I had him out of wedlock. So religion in our culture is it's a hit or miss. It's so it impacted me because that was not like some of the answers that I went to them for, some type of support, just anything, and that was something that they couldn't give me. And if it wasn't for my belief and my faith in God, I don't think I would have handled it the way that I handled it. It was a different impact. It wasn't very forthcoming, I would say. So it was a negative impact because you just can't. Sometimes you have to go and seek science for help. You can't just pray everything away and think that it'll just disappear, or it operates in that. Some of us need like truth behind it and not a religious version behind the diagnosis. So I would say that's how it affected me. It just made me lean into my spirituality and I pulled away from religion.
And I'm gonna ask you to hold that thought some, because we're gonna go back to that later on in one of our questions, more specifically at religion. But I'm glad that you open up that conversation. Bernie, how about you? Cultural norms and beliefs that have affected you and your journey.
Well, I am a multicultural person, just like Dr. Gregory mentioned. I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up in Maryland. I went to school both in Virginia and in Boston. I married someone from West Africa, from Nigeria, and then I ended up halfway around the world into a completely different culture. So the question about how does the court, what cultural norms or beliefs and the impact on ALS, I'll address this from a West African point of view, since I've lived here for more than 40 years. And to be honest, it is a culture that does not support or believe in infirmity. It does not have the patience for the less capable, physically less capable, or even mentally less capable. This culture has a tendency to um, consider you as less than complete as a person. Therefore, your ability to contribute to the day-to-day society is considered diminished, unless, of course, you fight back. And in the process of fighting back, you display your own level of intelligence. You create your own ability to be independent in spite of, and then you get something that you become a cultural exception rather than a cultural norm, which is to send you to the village to have one young or two people to cater for you and wait for you to die. So I can say that the cultural norms in most West African countries that I have been to, and even South Africa, because I have traveled all over the continent, is a little bit less accommodating than it is the most European or the United States in terms of dealing with people who have handicaps or disabilities. And as far as a terminal illness is concerned, I agree with Lakia. It might be a Black person's issue, regardless of where you're coming from, and that you cannot pray it away, and therefore, or what did you do to do this? And it is, your illness is simply not accepted. You know, you really, it is not an acceptable condition. And the comment, it will get better and God is in control. You will always hear these comments. And you say, okay, so where's the science in that? But, you know, and I think that's what I have experienced also. So you can see religion and culture kind of mix, seriously.
Yeah, I definitely saw a theme, and we're going to be circling on both religion and science in a little bit. You know, I come from a different cultural perspective. As a Hispanic person, I would have to look at that, how family and including extended family, you know, aunts, cousins, you know, it's like this sort of like little worker ants, how they all sort of rally around us. Okay, who's going to do it? I'm bringing food on Tuesday. Who's bringing on Thursday? Who's going to come in and take care of that sort of rally for support? I'm sure not unique to Hispanics, but it's very much prominent as a cultural trait. The thing is, sometimes that gets a little bit in the way because you don't go to support groups. You keep it within the family. You don't go outside the family for uplifting and support. You keep it within the family, and so it's, you know, it's got that, you know, plus and minus, I guess, you know, in that process. You know, but it's interesting how we got some, you know, the science and the role of religion being mentioned. Of course, family. And Dr. Gregory, how do you see those answers? How do you see those cultural norms and beliefs? How they shape an individual's journey faced with ALS or terminal diagnosis in general?
Yeah. Well, what you believe, you help to manifest. You know, if you believe you can fly, then you have a, yeah, you're going to have a better chance. If you believe that you don't have a chance, that's going to really sabotage your ability. But if I can comment a little bit on what Letitia started off talking about the religion things, all, religions and cultures are on a continuum. They're not all, there's subcultures even within them. So my experience is most religions go from one extreme, fundamentalism, where either you believe what I believe, the way I believe it on the day I believe it, or you go into hell, you're wrong, or whatever. To the other end extreme, more progressive. Progressive end is this is what I'm doing that works for me. If what you're doing works for you, then I'm happy for you and I'm with you, like that. So it's more of more open and more about manifesting than it is about judging. That ethnocentricity, my way is the right way, the way I see things, that's about judgment. That's about judgment. And judgment is a it's a way of projecting on other people issues that are unresolved in ourselves. The judgment is never really about the other person. It's really something in ourselves that we haven't dealt with. So when we can be open and accepting that there's more than one way to do things, to see things and stuff, we do better than when we come up with all these judgments and restrictions. One of the ones that I think applies to ALS too is the assumption that because somebody is losing their physical acumen, that they can't be or aren't productive. You know, again, it's a one size fits all. No.
Okay. Thank you for that. I see, Julie, some comments in the
Yeah.
chat.
So Karen said, my person living with ALS, my husband's culture was to not discuss any challenges in life. You muddle through. And Lakia said, it's always God or herbalism before science.
I'm curious before we go to the next question, anybody else that has something they want to add to the broader conversation around those cultural norms? Okay, then we'll move on, but as always, feel free to raise your hand and let us know. Since the topic of religion was brought up, I'd like to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that and kind of understand a little bit more about how that cultural impact and how you view religion as part of one of the variables of that culture that Dr. Gregory defined. How does that impact your approach to ALS? And Nikki, I'm going to go back to you since you helped us kind of dive in there and get a chance to dive deeper into the topic.
Yeah, and in our culture, it's definitely like I said in the comments, it's religion or herbalism, but it's never science. And a lot of that has to do with, historical moments. We've had a lot of trauma when it comes to the healthcare. So science will always be out because they're in our culture, they're always going to look at it as you're a guinea pig. They just want to run tests on you. They're going to harm you. So it was just left with, we either have to heal ourselves or we just have to pray about it. And I felt like religion, and it's hard because I went through different religions. Um, just growing up, I went from, Christianity, Catholic, to Muslim, to Jehovah, to reading the Book of Mormons, just trying to find to make some sense out of it all, because you don't talk about it. If like my son, you didn't talk about it. No one asked me how he was doing. It was he'll be all right. Let's just sweep it under the rug, and whatever happens. It'll be okay. And God wanted it this way. So it was either, or if it's not God wanted this way, then you did something sinful for it to be this way. So religion definitely was not helpful for me. And that's why I relied on spirituality and my faith.
Thanks. Bernie?
Well, in my space, we have, you know, your native religions, let me put it that way, and you have your Orthodox religions, and they're kind of mixed in together. So, yes, I was born basically non-religious based, but I grew up in a Methodist church. I married my husband who is Catholic. So we practice the Catholic religion, but yet and still it blends, but then sometimes it is at variance with local culture and local behaviors. And therefore, it depends on who you're talking to, So I think that here the culture is more about the community and what the community chooses to do and not do. And some communities are influenced by their more structured religions. And those structured religions could be whether they're the Orthodox churches or whether they are the deities within a particular village that they go, and really this does happen, where they will go to a shrine and actually pray to the water gods or whatever have you. And then, of course, they will come back and tell you to take a bath in this or drink that, and you should be healed. I mean, and I know that's not going to work. But again, these are all cultural practices, and people sincerely believe in them. And for those of us who are impacted by ALS, you learn to listen and not necessarily criticize, but you take the pieces that are good for you and you just leave the rest of it on the table. You just leave the rest of it on the table. If you didn't, you'd be mad by now. Totally crazy. That's my take on it.
Bernie, we share that link to Catholicism. I was raised Catholic, no surprise based on where I'm from. My mom, very devout. My experience was slightly different in the sense that it's a sort of a mixed bag. I still in my wheelchair have a little stamp, I guess I'd call it, of a monk that has been is in the process of waiting to to be canonized, becoming a saint, and who's was believed to be a healer. And so as soon as I was diagnosed, and then as soon as I got my wheelchair, she made sure it was on my wheelchair. But my mom got me that as kind of, very traditional Catholic. I have that relic, have that thing that ties you more physically to somebody that can help and look over you, not necessarily with the idea that because I have it, I would be healed, but it didn't hurt, uh, kind of thing. Um, and of course, from her perspective, it was not as much um, the experience like you had about, whether prayer cures all. It was more of a pray, but pray for strength, pray for acceptance, pray for peace within yourself, um, and ask to be healed. And, because God can perform miracles, but that was not plan A. It's more of the strength to accept, and to enjoy the time that I might have left. And so it was a different call to prayer, I guess I would say. Like being from Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, um, some of you might have heard of, Santeria or some other such types of religion. And every once in a while you would hear, not so much from my mom, but from other family members, or that might say, well, you should go to see such and such that might work out, something, for you, and kind of get rid of some of the spirits that are lingering, and takes get that, do a cleansing, as they would call it. And so you always have that in the fringe, but definitely it was always discussed, um, but from that perspective of support and looking for strength and peace. So, Dr. Gregory, I see you nodding. Curious
Yes.
of your perspective.
Yeah. One of my mentors used to say all the time, be your own scientist. Everybody else can give you their opinion or advice or whatever, but you have to take what resonates for you in your soul. We say above all to thine own self be true, and then experiment with that. And it doesn't have to be either or. That's what I'm hearing from Bernie. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be a combination of things that work for you. Yeah, there's a whole lot of documentation. There's scientifically that says prayer works. But I may not want to pray with everybody in the way that somebody else says I need to pray. It's for me to study and figure out what it is that attracts me. Another one of my mentors used to say that you can read all the scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, whatever, but they're sealed texts. Several people can read the same text, but and come up with different meanings, because life is speaking to each one of us all the time. It's about lessons. And when we are paying attention, when we are trying to be open to and absorb what life has given us, and then do the best we can to make informed decisions, we do better. And that may mean at times the group that we used to hang out with at a certain stage of development may not be appropriate at this stage of development. Not hating on them, but we may have grown to a place. All of us need to be around like-minded people. And as we grow in our consciousness, that group may change, but we all have that need for support, for camaraderie, for people to work with and believe in us.
Yeah, thanks for that. As you were talking, I was reminded of something, and it tying back to what Lakia had said, that there's also influences that we encounter about, that somehow the idea that if you're still sick and not healed is because you haven't prayed enough. Sort of trying to put that bit of maybe guilt or kind of responsibility of, somehow we were at fault in some way for our disease. And, so, as you said, Dr. Gregory, we encounter multiple inputs, it's that mixed bag, and we have to sometimes know who to listen to, who to not to, and how to navigate through a lot of noise and find our true path.
Yeah. And it seems to me the one path to healing that you brought it up is dealing with those stored emotions that may have come from a lot of our experience, some of which may be negative, whether it's anger or hurt or guilt or shame, but to work through them and get to the love, the light, the forgiveness, the healing inside of us so that we won't be sabotaged by those negative feelings that are stored inside. They're just there to teach us something. And once we get the message, we can release them. We can release them and feed ourselves that which is nourishing emotionally.
I would like to respond because I actually believe that is true. And the reason why I say that is this, and I take myself as an example. I had 2.5 years with I considered a fairly rapid decline in the entire ALS journey. I went from dancing in the street to a wheelchair and unable to put food in my mouth and so on and so forth. And then it just seemed to stop. And I've been in the same stage now for about 3.5, almost 4 years, where it hasn't gotten any worse. And I believe sometimes it was the acceptance, it was the personal decision not to chase the answers and look for everyone else to solve my problem, but to simply go inward and actually say, you're going to be okay. And I don't know if that has anything to do with culture or deep-seated resolve or whatever. It was, and I did learn, let me put it this way, I learned how to pray, but I did it on my own, not as a structured religions, etc. So I found that structured religions were a little less satisfying. But at the end of the day, I think mind over matter. I do believe there's some science in the mind over matter thing. I really do.
I just want to say in the chat, Juan says, my perspective is that many individuals divest themselves of the perceived loss of control and place the onus on a higher being. And rather than facing the reality that it's simply a random development, believing that there has to be a reason or a cause.
Yeah. And when you stop doing that, you start to feel better.
As always, Juan just knows the right things to say. Anybody else wants to share their perspective? And
yeah.
if not, go ahead. Yeah, please, Mickey. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is, well, actually my name is Michelle, but my nickname is Nikki. But with about half the people here, I hope you remember, I have primary lateral sclerosis. So it's just the slower form, it's of ALS. I'm into my 25th year, so I'm doing okay. And I do agree with you, Bernadette, that there is the mindset. If you're going to keep on living, you live to your fullest. I love going bowling, especially for those places that are accessible, because I have to be in my wheelchair. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I get a kick out of, making a strike or two or a spare. And, those are the things that psychologically and emotionally, lift me up. It's still creeping, it's still creeping as I'm going, but that's not going to stop me from, enjoying life as much as I can, even in traveling. Which is, I travel the public bus. I live in a facility and people say, Michelle, aren't you afraid? No, I go where I have to go, come back before dark, and I'm good. So, if you know how to read the street, you know where you're going and stuff like that, it's no issue. But the being educated about the disease, I think, brings even a much higher understanding as to what you're going through. In our support group, the Glendale ALS support group, we had a student, a neurological student from UCR, to give us a PowerPoint seminar about what they think is causing the nerve cells to die, and how physiologically it's happening. So that even furthered my understanding on a scientific measure as to what's actually going on. My daughter was teaching biology, and she said, Mom, can you come in and talk to my students about MS and PLS? And that's what I did. And the kids she began to understand more about what was happening. And so education, I believe, is very important. If prayer is in your daily, activity, pray, because that's another psychological, emotional, spiritual impact that's going to help keep you going. So that's all I wanted to add. So thank you.
I appreciate you chiming in. Thank you. Julie, we got some more comments in the chat.
Yeah. So Michael says, most cultures do not have an answer to dealing with death. Most cultures deal with death and process their feelings after death. Those of us living with ALS and our caregivers are going through the 7 stages of dealing with death prior to, maybe like anticipatory.
Anticipatory grief, of course. And then let's see, there's another note from Randy.
Yeah. Athletics have been a part of my culture since I was a little boy. The foundation of athletics, overcoming challenges, fight to the end. Oops, sorry. Fight to the end, find a way to make it work, etc. has served me well. Has served me well on this journey. Learning that the fundamentals have a spiritual connection has allowed me to grow even more and obtain the spiritual benefit in this journey. And Juan says a positive outlook, regardless of beliefs, is a powerful force.
Absolutely. Now, I want to, excuse me, I want to go back to another pillar, I would say, that Lakia mentioned in her opening response, and that was that of the role of science. And we're going to be running a little short on time, so I'm going to ask you all to kind of keep your answers, brief. But I think we need to kind of explore that a little bit more. And how do you see that kind of that marriage of culture and science? How that have played a role in your own journey? Licky, I'll start with you.
It's you said to marry. How do I marry culture into science?
It's how the role that science has played relative to some of those other cultural beliefs that you were addressing earlier. How do they come together nicely? Do they collide and cause conflict? How?
For me, it had to collide. I put myself in a space where I feel like I pray for the right scientist when I pray now. I pray for the right connection. So even though I still pray and I hold that belief that, I sit with myself and I have a belief that he gave me an angel to care for a brief amount of time. and it was my time. It was his time to go back to him. So I still have my faith belief, my cultural beliefs, but I just pray for different things now. I don't pray for a cure. Like I wouldn't pray for a cure. I would pray that the right doctor comes along and find a cure, or I pray that I'm able to meet the right doctor who won't be dismissive to me, and override, what I'm asking or what I'm saying. So I just feel like I changed how I view things now and what I pray for.
Okay, and Bernie, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I'm going to ask you if you can maybe take a look at in your response how it affects perhaps in things like clinical trials or your own interactions in terms of your own care, and how
Sure.
that science and culture have affected that.
Well, I had been denied access to clinical trials simply because I was a long hauler, and the delay in diagnosis basically disqualified me from just about everything. So, but again, I believe that my positive well-being has probably been the best clinical medication they could have probably provided for me anyway. So while I think culture and science do come together at some point in time, I'm not sure that they understand each other. Science has one role to play, and culture basically gives you that mental support to be able to get through the day to day. I mean, after all, science will tell you, well, the medicine did not work, let's move on to something else. But the rest of your well-being is not addressed in the science space. It's addressed through your doctors, etc., but not through the clinical trials. So I'm not a fan.
Understood. Lakia, and I mean, just kind of as we start to look to wrap up, you alluded to this before, and I think it's an important topic when we talk about culture and science. There's a history, is there not, with African American community and science, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to address that a little bit more, especially when it comes to, being part of trials and things of that nature.
Yeah, so it's funny because I meet a lot of clients of color, and the first thing they're reluctant about is science. And they have all of these fears. Well, what if they do this with this? And what if they, take my DNA and do this? And what if they do that? What if they give me the wrong match? So I have to, I think the way that I address them is to bring up history and culture. And I bring up history before what had happened during the slavery period. I go back to like ancient Egypt, where there were definite scientists back then. The Moors, they were scientists back then. So I just try to give them the space to say, we have always been intuitive with science, and bring that into their spirituality so they can feel a little more at ease with going and creating that safe space to say, we get where we came from in that time frame, but we have to go back to the beginning. And sometimes that is science. We have to figure out what are we doing in here in order to make medications better, in order to make healthcare better. And it's going to take all of us to delve into that space in order to find the right cures or treatments for anything. So that's just how I kind of bridge it together when it comes to that, because we need more research for people of color to help people of color. Same way if you have sickle cell anemia, you're going to want more African American blood because it predominantly affects African American. And so it's just navigating those space and bridging it together.
Yeah, I can tell you that some time back we were looking at some specific statistics with regards to the impact of culture and race in terms of ALS diagnosis. And there's definitely a correlation. This idea that somehow people of color don't get ALS. Um, you know, so it's right off the bat, the dispelling that, add to that some of the past history, certainly makes it a little bit of a uphill struggle for folks to trust. So I certainly can appreciate that. There's one last comment here, Julie, in the chat, and I know.
So Karen says, quick question. The folklore says that ALS patients are nice. My husband had a complete personality change with his adventure. He certainly was positive, but it was the disease. But it was with the disease.
Yeah, and I've heard that before, and I don't necessarily know. I think like anything else, personalities vary, and if certainly it's a heavy burden for the individual going through it. Of course, the caregivers as well, but I think that when you're faced with your own mortality like that, it can be unpredictable how you respond. But I like to think that in general, we're all nice. And I think if nothing else, proof of our fine panelists today, they were all super nice and gracious with their time. And so we appreciate that. And all of you were super nice for listening in and participating. And we're glad that you were able to make it. Julie, there's another one who wants to have the final word, I think.
Yeah. Juan says, I think this is a great ending note. I believe that science and cultural/faith beliefs go hand in hand. Both require a degree of risk in the sense that you place hope in factors one can't control. And Amber said, thank you. This was wonderful. And Laura said, thank you so much. Very interesting conversation and such important issues. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And especially thanks to Troy for guiding us in this conversation. And like I said, we recorded this session, so we will be putting it up on YouTube. We'll also be sending it to all of you that registered. So please feel free to share it with your networks. And like I said, if you'd like to learn more about the Many Shades team, I'll put a link to that in the chat if you'd like to join us. So thanks very much, everybody.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas
Happy holidays.
to all, and thank you all for being a part of it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.